and welcome to the 2020 online season of the Cape Cod Chamber Music Festival. This is John Nakamatsu, and I am here with my colleague John Manasse. Together, we are the artistic directors of the Cape Cod Chamber Music Festival out in eastern Massachusetts, a festival whose history began over 40 years ago with its founder, the late pianist Samuel Sanders. The festival now spans 4 weeks each August, with concerts and events throughout the Cape, and this year goes online for the first time, in the midst of pandemic restrictions, to present a number of recordings from the archives of the festival. In this next hour, we will hear music of Gabrielle Faure, his second piano quartet, with the renowned artists violinist Eugene Drucker, also of the Emerson String Quartet, violist Toby Appel, cellist Roberta Cooper, and pianist Brian Zeger. Brian Zeger was one of our artistic director predecessors here at the Cape Cod Chamber Music Festival, and he will join us later for an interview about his time on the Cape, the Faure Piano Quartet, and his life in this unique time. But before we get to the Faure, we will be hearing music of Carl Maria von Weber, performed in a recording by our own clarinetist, John Manasse, and our festival founder, pianist Samuel Sanders. Right now, I have the particular honor of speaking with my colleague, John Manasse. So John, growing up in California, I had never visited Cape Cod before our affiliation here, but I know you had. Can you tell us about that?
Well, let's see. The difference between California and Cape Cod, California has palm trees and Cape Cod has steamers. So that's the main difference. Well, okay.
That's a big difference.
Well, what I can honestly tell you about it is, I did not visit Cape Cod until Sam Sanders had invited me as a guest performer with his, actually, at that time, fledgling festival. It was only the fifth or sixth season, I think. And I got to know the Cape really through the Cape Cod Chamber Music Festival and its founder, Samuel Sanders.
Well, and you said Sam had been your chamber music coach at Juilliard?
Oh, yeah, Sam was actually a very powerful influence for me, and he was a very exacting and demanding chamber music coach, but also very flexible and encouraging for me. I would say his belief in me and his invitation he extended to me to come to his festival was a very powerful career buoying move on his part. I don't think he quite realized how much it meant to me, but it taught me the power of belief from an individual who is so established.
Well, in fact, your first recording, as you mentioned, was with Sam, and we will hear a portion of that recording in a bit. What was that whole experience like, then recording with someone who used to be your teacher?
Well, again, powerful, buoying, awe-inspiring, and in some ways challenging personally, because I think it's important. You can't really speak about Sam Sanders without speaking to his personal challenges. He was born what they call as a blue baby, which is a congenital heart defect where there's a small hole in the heart. And he happened to be born at a time just at the cusp of all these advances in cardio technology and new operations. And he had so many open heart surgeries with, at that time, whatever the moment was, the latest and best mechanism to extend his life. And by the time I made these recordings, literally he was just months away from the biggest surgery of his life, which was a heart transplant. I guess regrettably, I wasn't focused enough on being sensitive to Sam's level of strength at the time. And I was aware of it, but I was just so thrilled to be a part of this recording with him that I realized we probably needed more breaks and more, I guess, flexibility in how we recorded. We recorded very late into the night many times, but it was at his insistence.
Well, the piece we are about to hear from this recording is the Grand Duo Concertante of Carl Maria von Weber. Can you tell us about the piece?
The piece is a clarinet player's dream because it encompasses everything we love about the instrument. And Weber knew this, and he wrote it for his clarinet muse, Heinrich Beermann. He wrote several great clarinet works, solo and chamber music pieces, with this man in mind. And this piece in particular, he wrote for himself and Heinrich Beermann, which they collaborated many, many times on tour. So successful they were that they chipped in and purchased a stage carriage together, a comfortable stage carriage, so that they can tour in greater comfort. The piece itself is representative of, I guess, the perfection of Weber in displaying the virtuosity of the clarinet, the virtuosity of the pianist, and above all, you hear all the powerful maneuverings of his operatic genre du Freischütz, where the clarinet in the slow movement, it's a full-on aria. And in the second movement, actually the first movement you're about to hear now, he even has a brief moment, well, you can call it an arietta, in the middle of all the florid virtuosic fireworks.
So let's now have a listen to a recording made back in 1998 by the very young John Manasse with pianist Samuel Sanders. This is the first movement of the Grand Duo Concertante for clarinet and piano, Opus 48, written in 1816 by the composer Carl Maria von Weber. We have just heard the first movement of the Grand Duo Concertante for clarinet and piano, Opus 48 by Carl Maria von Weber. The clarinetist in this 1988 recording by XLNT Music was John Manasse, and the pianist was Samuel Sanders.
But now we turn our attention to the present and a conversation with our good friend Brian Zeger. Pianist Brian Zeger has served as the artistic director of the Cape Cod Chamber Music Festival. He is hailed as one of today's most sought-after collaborative pianists. He's toured with singers such as Marilyn Horne, Anna Netrebko, Kiri Takanua, Friederike von Stade, Bryn Terfel, and Deborah Voigt. That's just to name a few. He is currently the artistic director of the Vocal Arts Department at the Juilliard School. He holds a bachelor's degree in English literature from Harvard College, a master's from the Juilliard School, and a doctorate from the Manhattan School of Music. Thank you so much for joining us today, Brian.
I'm so happy to be here, John. You know, the Cape Festival, Festival has been a very important part of my life. In fact, I go so far back with it. It used to be called the Cape and Islands Chamber Music Festival back when Sam originally founded it. And my history goes back to not long after that. Sam invited me. Actually, I think I was still a Juilliard student or had very recently been one when I went up one summer. They were short of pianists for kind of a quick weekend of concerts. So I remember going up there and being so honored to be part of it as a young player. I didn't dream at that point that I would be able to actually direct the festival. But one day I remember we were at a dinner party together, and he sort of took me aside after the dinner party and said, "You remember that festival that you played for me?" I said, "Of course, Sam. What do you think about becoming the director?" I think I fell to the floor in astonishment at the idea that he would trust me with this. But he did entrust me with it, and then we kind of ran it together for basically about 18 months. But he, Sam always knew that he had these big health challenges coming, and I think he was facing one of his big hospitalizations at that point, whether that was his first heart transplant or something. I don't quite remember the chronology, but he was very wise, and he loved the festival so much, and he was so proud of what he'd done. He wanted to make sure always that there was a sense of continuity. So I became this kind of the central figure in that continuity for him for a while. But then all the years that I ran it, he came back and played. So there was just as a performer. So there was always a very strong sense of continuity there.
Well, kind of changing the subject and bringing the discussion up to date, what have you been doing these past few months in isolation during this strange time?
Well, it's been very challenging. But my full-time work at Juilliard has remained full-time. I think I just clocked my millionth Zoom meeting. Administratively, a lot has to happen behind the scenes for the school to keep going, and we had to make sure that we were going on with our academic offerings enough that people would be able to actually graduate, which they did. We staged an entire remote graduation. We're now in the process of launching Juilliard's first ever summer term. We've never had summer courses before, but we're doing them this year because so many of our students have lost their summer festival learning. And a musician's work has to keep going. You've got to keep on your instrument, as you all know, or in the case of a singer, the instrument is inside them. But that's got to continue, and that momentum of learning and discovering new repertoire has to keep going. The problem is, of course, it can't happen in ensembles right now. So I'd say lacking the ensemble experience, what we've been able to do is beef up the sort of research aspect of people's learning, where with the incredible depth of repertoire and learning that can happen on the internet has been really heightened. So we're trying with all these young people to keep them going, I have to say.
We dug through our archives and we found this stunning, compelling performance of the Faure piano quartet. And I was just wondering, we're about to hear it, but before we hear it, can you just tell us anything about the piece that you want to, or how did you decide on Faure, and how did you decide on these artists? Anything, yeah.
Well, Faure wrote two piano quartets. The C minor, the first quartet, is the more celebrated one. It's perhaps a bit more accessible than the piece you're about to hear, although I'm deeply in love with the piece you're about to hear. The second quartet was one I fell in love with, but as I say, it had not been played so much. And I talked Gene Drucker, who's one of the violinists of the Emerson String Quartet, into doing it with me. And then once Gene and I got on board, we fleshed out the ensemble. And it's a piece that was a real labor of love for me. I find it monumental, symphonic in its structure. It's a big, sprawling piece, although written in very classical forms. I mean, the opening movement is a classic sonata allegro form. For me, the real gem of the piece probably is the slow movement, which has extended viola solos that are haunting, very suggestive and kind of hypnotic. For me, it's one of the great slow movements in the literature. And I remember the joy of working on it with those musicians. And in fact, I did not revisit it until last summer. I guess the summer of 2019. I revisited with, of course, with different musicians at the Chautauqua Festival, and it was just wonderful to come back to it.
So now the second piano quartet in G minor, Opus 45 of Gabrielle Faure. Our guest, Brian Zeger, is the pianist, with violinist Eugene Drucker, violist Toby Appel, and cellist Roberta Cooper in this live Cape Cod Chamber Music Festival performance of August 14, 1998. the Piano Quartet in G minor, opus 45 by Gabrielle Faure in a live performance at the Cape Cod Chamber Music Festival on August 14th, 1998. Performing were violinist Eugene Drucker, violist Toby Appel, cellist Roberta Cooper, and pianist Brian Zeger.
And thanks to our listeners for joining us for this segment of the 2020 online season of the Cape Cod Chamber Music Festival. You can find us online at www.capecodchambermusic.org. We hope to see you one day soon, virtually or even better in person on the Cape. I am John Manasse.
And I am John Nakamatsu.
And we wish you all solace and joy through music.
Funding for this program was made possible through the generosity of festival donors and our loyal listening audiences.